And hopefully that cleared up any misconceptions you might have had about anarchism and police abolitionism. Oh, thank fucking God for that. That was a quick shoot. All right, what's next? Interviews. And we are right on time. He should be there. The multiverse is equivalent of hell! The fire, it burns so bad! Hello? Domri, baby, it's Spice 8-Rack here, aka Always Down and Mostly Dirty. How you doing?
Spice Man! What are you saying? How's life in the land of the living?
Making do. I'm actually working on a video about police abolitionism and anarchism, how they've been, misunderstood and been misrepresented in the media of late, yada yada yada.
Ugh, that sounds excessive.
Nah, not really. I probably need to put some fluff in to get the runtime up to 10 minutes, to be honest. Anyway, I wanted to get a clear definition of anarchism and police abolitionism from a real anarchist, just to open the video up with. And Doretti wasn't answering my emails, so I was wondering, would you be down?
Oh, no sweat. How's this? Anarchism is where you destroy civilization in order to bring about chaos, and police abolitionism is redundant because society can't function without them, so we should just destroy society.
Perfect. Domri, thank you. You are a lifesaver. Give my love to Dak.
Don't mention it.
Okay. That video was sponsored by channelfireball.com. Use code SPICE at the checkout when purchasing any singles or... Wait.
Oh, please, whatever god is in charge of this plane, just kill me again already. Ooh. Spice Man, back for more?
Did you say anarchism is where you destroy civilization?
Well, yeah. That's what it is, right?
Well... Right. Okay. No, sorry, this is completely wrong.
I know, right? I mean, where did I even get a phone?
Not with the pretense, Domri, with your statement.
Oh, was I supposed to, smash a journalist's skull in whilst I said it or something?
No, Domri, quite the opposite. That's not what anarchism is all about.
What are you talking about? The very definition of anarchy is a state of lawlessness or political disorder brought about by the lack of governmental authority. If that's what anarchy is, that's what anarchists are fighting for.
Okay, it is true that anarchists want to remove the government, but not to then leave their communities afterwards with literally no organisation whatsoever. And yes, various kinds of violence are useful tools for anarchists, both past and present, in the form of direct action or propaganda of the deed, but they are just that. Tools. They are very much a means and not an end, and certainly not the only tools that anarchists have and use as a means of furthering their agenda.
Nah, I like my definition better.
That's not how language... Okay, now I feel like we need a common understanding at the bare minimum. Let's start with the roots. What is it that anarchists dislike about the government?
Well, I don't know. They're all Azorius.
Yes, and what are the Azorius? Well, granted. But anarchist critique of government has less to do with a focus on individual people in government and more to do with the system itself. One of the core uniting aspects of anarchism is the resistance and disdain for unjust or unfair hierarchy. The rejection of authority and domination of person over person unites anarchists in a shared struggle against the centralization of power and monopolization of resources. These monopolies can come in the form of fiscal monopolies, such as like Disney owning literally every movie ever to be made now, or in monopolies such as the monopoly on violence that the state holds.
Hang on, monopoly on violence?
Yes, that's where the state holds the exclusive right to use violence where it would be illegal for a civilian to. Like how the police can fire tear gas into a crowd of peaceful protesters completely legally, but if you were to then pick up that tear gas canister and throw it back at them, suddenly that becomes assault with a deadly weapon.
I'm pretty sure all of that is just what I said, but with more letters. Anyway, isn't domination what the Rakdos do?
Well, no. Yes, but anarchists refer to a different kind of domination. Consider the law, right?
Oh, I f***ing hate the law.
I am fully aware. Now, in theory, the law exists as a way to ensure safety and security by warding against bad behavior and punishing bad actors. You know, the whole, like, don't steal my car, you'll go to prison if you do. John Locke, the father of liberalism, once said that where law ends, tyranny begins.
Well, he sounds like a prick.
Aye, yeah, a little bit. Very weird man. One of the last major philosophers to defend and justify slavery. He was super into it too.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Proper wanker.
Proper wanker. Anywho, in practice, the law doesn't really work like that. People face disproportionate jail sentences and punishments for pretty minor crimes. They're then put into a prison system which makes no real effort to reform anyone. And then, if and when they finally are released back into the world, they often have no money, no skills, potentially no connections anymore, and will be treated like a criminal by the rest of society pretty much until the day they die. The only way of surviving for many of these people is to reoffend, either as a means of getting money or to re-enter the prison system, where at least they had food and a bed. Even if they can survive in the world without reoffending, people who exit the prison system are going to be treated as criminals by bosses, by bankers, by landlords, and pretty much everybody in society. And if everybody tells you you are something, you might start to believe it. Our laws are only necessary because the governments that we live under do not provide the bare necessities that humans need to live and function in our world. Emma Goldman said it best.
The most absurd apology for authority and law is that they serve to diminish crime. Aside from the fact that the state itself is the greatest criminal, breaking every written and natural law, stealing in the form of taxes, killing in the form of war and capital punishment, it has come to an absolute standstill in coping with crime. It has failed to utterly destroy or even minimize the horrible scourge of its own creation.
Alright, whilst historically I don't trust women called Emma, she is only saying facts. Like, rubble belt giants get hauled away by entire legions of Wojek spear pricks just for stealing a few apple trees to feed our clans, and Orzhov ghouls get to eat literal souls over breakfast and nobody bats a bloody eye.
Indeed, and that's not even touching on the fact that prisons profit from increased populations and so are paradoxically incentivized to keep more people locked away. In our world, there exists something called the prison industrial complex, which is a series of overlapping police, prison and surveillance functions and organizations, even run by the state or ran by private corporations with permission from the state. And boy, is it a profitable business. It's not just private prisons and private security firms which charge the government exorbitant amounts of money and are then incentivized to spend as little of that as possible on actually doing their job in order to maximize profit. There are people who profiteer from policing, from prisons and from surveillance at all levels of the prison industrial complex, from companies that transport prisoners, companies that cater for prisoners. It is perfectly possible for you to buy stock in a company that makes its money exclusively for locking humans away in giant cages. And that's fucked up.
Oh, we have that on Ravnica. I know monitors in the smelting district who make spear tips for the Boris Alberdiers. Now you mention it, their profits would take a massive hit if the boys in red and white stopped being so violent all the time. And if they're concerned about the money they're making off the business, I can't imagine what the people who profit directly from policing and prisons would do to make sure their pockets stay full.
Well, amongst other things, the people who profit from the prison industrial complex use a huge amount of their funds given to them by the government to then pay lobbyists to convince the government to keep giving them more money. But shitty lobbyists aside, anarchists have a much more foundational issue with organisations like prisons and the police that goes past the individual bad behaviour of a few people. The next question is, who gives the Azorius the authority to ransack Gruul lands?
Oh, I fucking hate these quizzes. I don't know, Lavinia?
Yes, and who gives Lavinia the right to command the Azorius?
Greg Weissman?
Yes, and tell me, Domri, is that fair?
Oh, absolutely not. Who gave him the right to decide that? The wanker killed me off and all.
Exactly, and anarchists in my world would agree that no one person or small group of people should be able to make decisions that affect other people's lives without their voluntary, non-coerced consent. Anarchism is a multifaceted ideology. It's very difficult to pin down exactly what anarchism is, but this definition by anarchist writer Lorenzo Comboa Irvin, I think, displays quite neatly exactly what the core of anarchism is.
Anarchists hope for, construct theories about, and act to promote the abolition of government, the state, and the principle of authority that is central to contemporary social forms, and to replace them with a social organisation based on voluntary cooperation between free individuals.
Consider this desire for voluntary cooperation as it pertains to, or lacks in pertaining to, the prison industrial complex. Someone can go through the criminal justice system whilst having their autonomy revoked by people that they've never met, by laws that they've never directly voted on, and they have a good chance of being exonerated, but only if they have the means to afford a good legal defence.
Yeah! That shit. Well, yeah, except for the voting bit. Not even sure why you brought that up. Anarchists hate voting and democracy.
Are you kidding? Anarchists love voting.
I beg your f***ing pardon.
Yeah, dude, voting whips ass when it's done right. Anarchists advocate for something called direct democracy, which is where individuals within a community or a business vote directly for the issues that affect them and then act on them themselves. This is in contrast to representative democracy, which is where a large group of people all get together and they vote for one person or a small group of people who they then trust to look after all of those issues for them. Additionally, there are different kinds of voting, such as consensus voting, which was utilised very effectively by the Occupy Wall Street movement. Consensus voting is where a vote cannot go through, progress cannot be made without the absolute consent of every single voting member. This ensures that no one minority is left behind and their voice is excluded, and equally, no one minority gets to decide the direction for a movement. Everybody's say-so is 100% needed for any progress to be made.
That sounds like a great way to get nothing done at all. How are you going to get an entire country to decide on literally everything? Rurik Thar can't even make up his mind as to whether or not he's going to join in with the Gruul uprising, and he's only 2 people.
Well, okay, hang on. For one, anarchists don't want to run an entire country. That kind of goes against their entire deal. Anarchists would much prefer the countries, states, and even cities to be federated into small communities that work voluntarily together, as opposed to one big, massive nation. Additionally, consensus voting is used throughout the world today, and very effectively. Most workers' cooperatives use consensus voting as a means to determine the trajectory of their business, and workers' cooperatives tend to have a better lifespan than traditional businesses with a traditional hierarchical structure. Workers' co-ops are twice as likely to celebrate their 10th birthday than a traditional business, for example. In advocating for the decentralization of power within communities, most, if not all, anarchists are also police and prison abolitionists, which is kind of why I'm making this video, seeing as both movements have kind of gotten shafted in the media spotlight of late, and New York Times writers don't understand either of them. So I've read like 17 books, and so now I'm gonna fucking guillotine the Pope. I should probably not put that in. Anarchists believe that the preventative remedies for the causes of crime, being rectifying social and economic inequalities, can and would be funded and provided by self-managed communities a lot better than by the state's punitive police force. And this really isn't like wishful thinking that if we just treat everybody nicer, crime will go away. There are direct causal links between things like the defunding of youth centres and the increase in crime in areas. Logically, if we increase the funding to youth centres, crime would also go down. And if crime's going down, we don't really need the police, do we? So we just use their money to give it to the youth centres. It's really not that fucking complicated. It's also vitally important to note that neither anarchists nor police abolitionists are advocating for community policing to replace state policing. Even in the most tightly knit of communities, unjust and coercive hierarchies can and do still exist. Now, police reformists argue that the system of policing isn't inherently broken. You know, it just needs a couple of tweaks here and there, and they often point to European countries. Hello, we've got very nice police, not like the nasty police over in America. Our cops are good. No, they're fucking not. No, fuck off, they're horrible. No matter how progressive and liberal a society is, the police of that society will always necessarily act as the means for the state to enact violence on its own citizenry. That can't be reformed. The police in Europe are just as institutionally racist as the police over in America. They use the same kind of disproportionate violence on black suspects, and they arrest black people at a much, much higher rate. The only meaningful difference between European-style policing and American-style policing is that for the latter, it is much easier for them to get a hand on a gun.
Well, yeah, obviously, just because something isn't lethal doesn't mean it's not brutal. I've got mates holed up in those detention sphere thingies all throughout New Prague still, and that's the Azorius' idea of humane punishment.
Well, very much so. In probably the best book that I've read on this subject, Our Enemies in Blue, Christian Williams highlights the difficulty in identifying and defining where the line gets drawn between policing and police brutality. Abuses of authority may look very much like their less corrupt counterparts. In non-totalitarian societies, authority exists within carefully prescribed, if vague, one might suggest intentionally vague, boundaries. Action within these limits is legitimate, similar action outside of such limits is abuse. But in the case of police violence, legitimate and excessive force exist as part of the same continuum, rather than as distinct species of action. Hence, where you and I see brutality, the cop sees only a day's work. As has been said before, violence is inherent in policing. It's what gives them power over you and me. And believing that such an institution can be reformed with a few extra rules and laws is a deeply, deeply naive approach. Additionally, it's important to note that the police of today are the reformed police. The police and prison system have been being reformed since their inception, and lots of the laws that reformists wish to bring in to curtail police brutality are already in effect. For example, on June 8th, 2020, New York State passed the Eric Garner Chokehold Act, which effectively banned the police from using chokeholds. But chokeholds had been banned in the state since 1993 anyway. The police just kept using them. The issue isn't that there aren't enough regulations on the police, the issue is the police itself. As Professor Dylan Rodriguez says,
We have to stop relying on the language and the rhetorics of police brutality. It's not police brutality if the state sanctions the violence. At that point, you move from calling it police brutality to calling it policing.
Look, I agree with you that all individual police officers should be ripped apart by Gruul warhawks.
I didn't say that.
But I'm sorry, I can't see how a pleasant society, let alone a civilization, can keep going without the police. Look how we do things in the Gruul, right? Somebody nicks your shit, you hit them over the head with the bird bath, job's done, justice. How are you gonna keep a precious Tin Street neighbourhood ticking along exactly as it does without Azorius goons there to intimidate the public? What if somebody steals something?
Well, okay, for one, hitting a thief over the head with a bird bath isn't justice. It's at best aggressive landscaping. Second, even with our massively overfunded police force, the chance of you getting stuff that got stolen from you back from the police is actually incredibly slim. The rate of recovery for US police officers in terms of stolen goods in 2018 was on average 28.4%, with things like firearms and electronic goods being 11% and 5% respectively. Now, the rate of the police successfully concluding and closing a case of vehicular theft was 14% in 2018. And of that 14%, 60% of the time, the police managed to recover the stolen car. Which means that if you call the police wanting to get your stolen car back, you have a 9% chance of ever seeing that car again. And on top of all of that, vehicular recovery is the police's best recovery rate. As for when that less in 1 in 10 chance happens and the police do recover your stolen vehicle, the writer Madison Pauly outlines in an interview why that isn't necessarily a victory for justice. What does this look like on a practical level? Say if my car gets stolen.
A friend of ours, they actually had their car stolen. The police actually recovered it and arrested the driver. So they were like, see, we need the police. And I said, well, let's dig a little deeper here. What do we know about the person who got arrested that stole your car? The police said that he'd been arrested a bunch of times and that there was drug paraphernalia left in their car. And I'm like, So we tried policing a bunch of times with this guy. Did it prevent your car from getting stolen? No. Is this person stealing cars because they have a drug problem? Probably. Is sending them to jail over and over again fixing their drug problem? No. Okay, if we want to reduce vehicle thefts, the first time we come into contact with this person, we've got to start trying to address what's driving their problematic behaviour.
Services, of course, still can exist in a post-cop world for finding stolen cars or breaking up bar fights, but police abolitionists argue that those services need to be non-violent, they need to be highly specialised, they need to not result in the people involved going to a jail, and most importantly, they need to be separated from each other. Even the most pro-cop writers at the moment will agree that the police are doing too much. They are responsible for solving too many of society's ills. They are not equipped for it. They are not well trained for it. Abolitionists simply take that one step further and argue that everything that the police is doing can and would be done better by non-violent and highly specialised organisations. If you'd like to know more about specific examples, I really cannot recommend The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. Alex Vitale, that's not right, by Alex Vitale enough. In this book, they go through a series of different examples of things that the police currently do for our world, things that we rely on the police for, and proffer meaningful alternatives to them. For example, on the war on drugs, they talk about how we could have... Oh, put that the bloody right way around. And don't knock over the fucking centerpiece. I didn't buy all these books to be smart. I bought them to put them on my table to make me look like a brain man. Vitale talks about the decriminalization of drugs, needle exchanges, facilities which supervise injections as meaningful, good alternatives for harm prevention as opposed to an armed police force. Additionally, even with things like assault and murder, the police as they are today are not actually compelled to help you. The Federal Court of the United States has affirmed multiple times that unless you are in police custody, they have no constitutional duty to protect you. Police abolitionists argue that rather than spending a ridiculous amount of money on a punitive police force that does not prevent harm or crime, in fact causes a lot of harm, read this book. Wow, wowee, there are some statistics in here. An estimated 991,930 people have experienced some level of force, including threats. More than half, 55%, or 546,000 people were subject to physical force. That latter group, if we got them all together, would make for a fair-sized city larger than Portland, Oregon. And when you orient yourself... And when you orient yourself to the fact that this city could be reproduced every year, you start to get some picture of how common police violence really is. Read this fucking book. It is scary, dude. Impromptu reading aside, abolitionists argue that rather than spending a ridiculous amount of money on a police force that doesn't reduce harm, that doesn't reduce crime, that doesn't even reliably get your stolen stuff back, that money would be better spent addressing the systemic issues that cause people to feel the need to commit harm or to steal things in the first place. In fact, the very existence of such a wide and powerful prison industrial complex like over in America or over here in England increases crime, both in the sense of how communities are ripped apart when someone is taken off to jail, and also in what exactly is criminalized. This is to speak nothing of the racism endemic in contemporary policing. There are countless studies that have shown clear biases in how the police deal with different suspects based on their skin color, and how when social and economic inequalities manifest after literally hundreds of years of oppression, the ramifications of that are more often met with deadly violence than they are with help. Also, American policing, specifically in the South, finds its roots in literal slave-catching squads, which, arguably, somewhat of a poisoned foundation to build an entire police service on, you might argue.
Oh, absolutely. And can I also just say, it still weirds me out that you've got people on your plane who genuinely believe that the overrepresentation of certain racial groups within crime statistics has something to do with genetics and IQ as opposed to blatant socioeconomic factors. I mean, that's roundly debunked pseudoscience bullshit, right? Like, Sean did a fantastic video about that, and there's also fantastic documentaries like The 13th that you can watch on Netflix.
Wait, you sat through all of those videos?
Well, no, I've got an absolutely awful attention span, but I heard they were very good.
I'll take it. Anyway, back to the police.
Oh, I hate the police.
Yeah. Punitively enforcing the law in a society with great social and economic divides between different racial groups will inevitably cause huge disparities in who and what is being policed and how. Dr. Jennifer EBERHARDT describes this in her book, Biased.
The role of obvious racial disparities can't be overlooked. Disparate outcomes in the criminal justice system, like who gets stopped and searched, how suspects get charged, who sits in jail to await trial, and who winds up with a prison sentence, shape a mindset that leads to biases in thought. When members of the broader public witness these disparities, many conclude that blacks are simply more crime-prone, and therefore deserve the negative treatment they receive. These narratives spring to life to justify unequal treatment, not just in the criminal justice area, but in our neighbourhoods, schools, and workplaces.
Okay, so the prison industrial complex is a racket, the justice system itself doesn't work, and the racism inherent in our system leads to the police as acting little more than a hyper-violent white supremacist enforcement brigade.
Word.
Yeah, well, getting rid of them is all well and utopian, but you'll see what really happens when the police go away.
Yeah, crime goes down.
Exactly. Cities will become rampant. Wait, hang on, could you run that by me one more time, Chief?
For example, in 2014, New York City police performed a work slowdown amid anti-police protests that erupted after the grand jury failed to indict Daniel Pantaleo after he killed Eric Garner. NYPD officers aren't legally allowed to strike, but what they did is effectively purposefully performed their job less effectively. They'd only respond to calls in pairs. They wouldn't leave their car unless they felt compelled to. They wouldn't issue warrants or summonses for misdemeanors and petty crimes, etc. And funnily enough, whilst you would expect, of course, that the rate of minor crime would go down seeing as fewer arrests were being made, there was actually also a decrease in the amount of major crime complaints as well. Each week, whilst this slowdown was in effect, there were 120, roughly, fewer reported cases of grand larceny, felony assault, burglary, etc. And this continued for 14 weeks after the police returned to their more proactive methods. Effectively, the police actively and purposefully not doing their job as well as they thought they could led to 2,100 fewer major crimes being reported.
Okay, sure, so the police going away might diminish major crime in the thousands, but you get rid of all police and all laws and people will be eating each other within a week. People are selfish.
I don't doubt that some people are self-centered and willing to take advantage of their neighbors for their own personal gain. No one would suggest that a perfect society could be formed where nobody does bad things to anyone ever. But right now, society as it is not opposed to that kind of selfishness and harming of others. If anything, it encourages it. For example, in the form of unnecessary competition. We produce enough food to feed everyone, we have enough houses to house everyone, and yet everybody is required to compete for different jobs and then compete with each other whilst in those jobs under the threat of violence in the form of homelessness or starvation should they lose their jobs. Additionally, the current goal of education for many societies isn't so much to teach children about the world and let them explore it freely, but more so getting them ready for a world of work. By completely defunding the police and using that money instead to meet people's needs, be it in the form of food, housing, healthcare, education, leisure, etc., we could negate the causes of unrest that lead to the need for the police in the first place. Humanity is not predestined to selfishness. It is not part of our human nature. Selfishness, harm, and what have you done for me lately style thinking is very much a direct result of our environment. Peter Kropotkin, a man who looks like a realistic Santa Claus, explained how the change in circumstance or in environment can make massive shifts to societal behaviour.
Suppose that one of our great cities, so egoistic in ordinary times, were visited tomorrow by some calamity. A siege, for instance. That same selfish city would decide that the first needs to satisfy were those of the children and the aged. Without asking what services they had rendered, or were likely to render society, it would first feed them.
Okay, maybe people won't eat each other at the first sign of hardship, excuse my hyperbole, but my point still stands. You take away the government overnight and you will have chaos. You still haven't addressed what would happen in a city with no police. You can't keep a pleasant society and no cops. It's either 10th District Police State or Rubble Belt Wildland.
But that's absolutely not the case though. Remember, the goal of abolition doesn't begin and end with universal overnight removal, but long-term change and divesting to eventually remove the current system. That being said, we have seen police departments forced out of cities in the US amid the protests following George Floyd's death pretty much overnight, and anarchy has replaced them, but not the kind of anarchy that you see on Magic the Gathering cards or ill-conceived New York Times op-eds, but the kind of anarchy where people pool and share their resources freely in the form of mutual aid. Take this eyewitness account from Minneapolis.
I'm looking at no black on black violence in the black central neighborhood 8+ days without no police. So there's no regular patrols or police riding around doing how they normally doing, and we don't got high spike levels of violence. We don't have high spike levels of home theft or any of that kind of stuff in the community, and it's been good. Everybody say they coming out here in they Sunday best. It's summertime. we like 90 days in COVID. You know what I'm saying? It looked like everything you can think of: a beautician, a barbershop, a barbecue. I mean, fixing bikes. You know what I'm saying? Giving out canned goods and necessities, because, you know, in those stores in the community, I mean, all those services, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you literally got people that just went shopping out here for free.
As you can see, police abolitionism isn't some fanciful idea that exists in a black hole of dense theory. And besides, humanity has existed before without the police. We will exist afterwards without the police. The precursors to contemporary policing, such as the frank pledges of 11th century England, were only first installed to ensure that the peasantry didn't get uppity during the recent Norman conquest of England. Like, what is widely credited as the first modern police department, the London Metropolitan Police, was founded less than 200 years ago in 1829. It was designed by Robert Peel and based after the Royal Irish Constabulary, an English colonial military force stationed in Ireland, which Peel had also designed. Crazy and wild that all contemporary policing just happens to find its roots in the military forces of colonialist occupation. All of that aside, abolition as a topic has gained a huge amount of interest, traction, and popularity. Recent polling has shown that 25% of Americans support the phrase, "we should reduce funding to the police." And that number goes up to 41% when the question instead asks, should we redirect funding from the police to mental health services and social services and things like that?
Oh, so it's unrealistic and unpopular. Really knocking this argument out of the park, aren't you, you bargain bin Russell Brand? Get a haircut!
You do realise that having a quarter of a country support unambiguous police abolitionism, a concept that at the start of the year was seen as a fringe utopian fantasy idea, is a massive deal. Like, in 2004, only 31% of Americans supported gay marriage and 60% opposed it. Very similar statistics.
Spice, you bellend! Everybody knows statistics aren't real!
Well, how about demonstrable examples of its popularity and implementation then? Less than 1 week after the global protests that erupted after the killing of George Floyd, Minneapolis City Council were pushed to fully defunding their police force after years of activism from groups like Reclaim the Block and a massive uptick in public scrutiny. Minneapolis City Councilman Steve Fletcher said,
"Several of us on the council are working on finding out what it would take to disband the Minneapolis Police Department and start fresh with a community-oriented, non-violent public safety and outreach capacity."
As to what would replace Minneapolis policing, Hannah Jones lays it out perfectly in her article reporting on this decision by the council, as well as laying out the inherent absurdity of relying on the police as a one-size-fits-all solution to society's problems.
Calls about mental health crises could be answered by mental health professionals. Calls about opioid abuse could be answered by addiction experts. Instead, both get cops, usually armed.
Frustrating editor's note, as I was finishing up this video, the Minneapolis Charter Commission actually blocked the move to put the subject of defunding the police to a public vote in November. But it's fine though, because these are elected representatives who are just enacting the will of the people. Oh, sorry, I'm confusing them for the city council. No one actually votes for the Charter Commission, they're just appointed by judges. You're telling me that the unelected commission of judge-appointed lobbyists are blocking criminal justice reform?
I too am a massive fan of democracy!
You see, Domri, police abolitionism doesn't sound ridiculous and scary when you realise the movement's ideology pretty much boils down to, hey, maybe we shouldn't fund and rely on an untrained and heavily armed police force to combat society's ills, many of which can be de-escalated peacefully or prevented in the first place.
I don't know, this whole thing sounds like a lot of work to me. And you know the old anarchist saying, if it can't be solved with a brick, it's a problem too complex to fix.
No, I've never heard of that one before. What is that, Sterner?
No, Borborygmus.
I don't know what I expected. But anyway, abolitionism isn't an everything or nothing, now or not at all type ideology. One of the greatest police and prison abolitionists of our contemporary age, Angela Davis, lays out the necessary intricacy and complexity of this idea in her wonderful book, Are Prisons Obsolete?
Rather than try to imagine one single alternative to the existing system of incarceration, we might envision an array of alternatives that will require radical transformations of many aspects of our society. Alternatives that fail to address racism, male dominance, homophobia, class bias, and other structures of domination will not, in the final analysis, lead to decarceration and will not advance the goal of abolition. The alternatives can also include job and living wage programs, alternatives to the disestablished welfare program, community-based recreation, and many more are associated both directly and indirectly with the existing system of criminal justice. But, however mediated their relation might be to the current system of jails and prisons, these alternatives are attempting to reverse the impact of the prison industrial complex on our world. As they contest racism and other networks of social domination, their implementation will certainly advance the abolitionist agenda of decarceration.
So to the people who demand to know what such a grand reorganisation would look like in practice, I hope you can now understand that there isn't some one-size-fits-all solution. Nobody has the specific answer of how to do a police abolitionism properly. Whilst we do need to reduce and eventually remove police presence, we must do that while simultaneously either improving or inventing the organisations and services that would go on to replace them. And it's also about changing our attitudes in society. You can't be a police abolitionist if you've got a cop living in your head. To understand what I mean when I say there's no one-size-fits-all solution, I direct your attention to the Mexican town of Charan in the state of Michoacan. In 2011, Charan expelled its entire corrupt police force as well as its local government in a people's uprising. They banned political parties and replaced them with a People's Assembly and reformed an armed community patrol group democratically elected by people within the community and made up of people from the community. There is a unique reason that Charan retains an armed patrol group, but it has nothing to do with the town's crime rates, them being next to zero with no serious crime complaints being registered since the People's Uprising. The threat comes from outside of Charan itself, with the governor of Charan's home state continually threatening to revoke the town's autonomy. Now, in towns, cities, and communities that don't face this kind of existential threat, the solution would look very, very different indeed. For another example, I now redirect your focus to that great radical text, Dinosaurs, specifically Season 3, Episode 3, Network Genius.
Police! Hold it right there! Come on! Don't shoot! I surrender. We're not gonna shoot you! We want to re-educate you! You see, son? You're just the product of an alienated economic class.
Look, Domri, we could talk for like another 20 hours about the police, but there are people who have made much more focused and in-depth discussions about this topic. The last thing that I would like to say on this is that whilst most, if not all, anarchists are police and prison abolitionists, not all police and prison abolitionists are anarchists. It's not a prerequisite, there's just a lot of shared ground there. As for resources, again, I highly recommend The End of Policing, Our Enemies in Blue, and Dr. Julian Eberhardt's Biased, all as fantastic resources for statistics and figures on police violence and racism within the police. And I also highly recommend Akala's Natives and Rennie Edo Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race to discuss the racism endemic within UK policing specifically. There's also absolutely amazing YouTuber Thoughtsline, who made a wonderful video about the police from an anarchist perspective, which is probably going to be much shorter than this one, and better just generally. Go watch their video, to be honest. But yes, I hope that you now understand a little bit more.
Alright, I hear you, Spice, and it really sounds like you're an inconsistent coward.
Wait, pardon?
abolish the police very quickly turned into, oh, but obviously we'd still need a series of organisations or community leaders trained in specific forms of crisis management. Like, even the Viashinu in the clip you played called themselves the police.
No, that was a comedically oversimplified puppet show. What do you think cops are?
Anyone who tells other people what to do. Duh.
Right, well, that's not quite what it's about.
Oh, just admit that you're ideologically inconsistent.
Oh, you'll want to talk about ideological inconsistencies.
Sorry, what was that?
Nothing. Look, maybe we should just move on.
Oh, thank Ilhog. I was getting bored of owning you. Can we please talk about smashing stuff now? Or are you going to tell me that real anarchists would set up consensus-based community councils every time they wanted to put a fist through someone's spine?
Well, you know, it really depends on who you ask.
Oh, you can't be serious. I was joking about the community councils.
No, not that bit. The question of violence as direct action. Direct action is a umbrella term that many different political organisations and groups use as a means of describing revolutionary activity meant to bring about societal change. For example, joining or forming a union, such as the TCG union, made up of organised TCG players formed in order to demand better healthcare and wages. That is as much an example of direct action as establishing a means of accessible education, much as Francisco Ferrer did in 1901 when he formed the Escuela Moderna. I am butchering that for absolute certainty. However, no two anarchists will draw the line at the same point as to what methods, violent or non-violent, are the best for dismantling unjust authority. And they will even draw the line at different points as to what that unjust authority even is. Like, sure, a parent stopping a child from running into a road is an example of justified authority, but what of the hierarchy of, let's say, a fishing boat? Is that justified? What of the revolution, as Frederick Engels writes on the topic of anti-authoritarianism?
Have these gentlemen ever seen a revolution? A revolution is certainly the most authoritarian thing there is. It is the act whereby one part of the population imposes its will upon the other part by means of rifles, bayonets, and cannon.
However, anarchists like Enrico Malatesta have written that whilst it would be ridiculous and ironic to attempt to impose freedom with brute force, it doesn't stop America from trying though. Those who own and dominate society as it stands today will oppose the creation of a new and freer society themselves with brute force. Any engagement with violent force from Malatesta's perspective is not a result of free choice, but more as a necessity in the defense of unrecognized human rights. For more information about Malatesta's specific perspective on anarchist violence, I highly recommend you check out Anarcho-Pac's video on the topic. And also every other video on her channel. She's really very good. For some anarchists and anarchist groups, violence is not only justified in the face of unjust authority, but it is indeed necessary to bring about wider societal change. For example, Japanese anarchists in the early 20th century plotted to kill Emperor Meiji as part of wider revolutionary activity. To quote one of the anarchists Uchiyama Gudo, this killing would be a symbolic act of bloodletting. You know, much like how Gideon and Liliana in the final throes of War of the Spark killed Nicole...
Hello?
Sorry, Wi-Fi must have gone down. But other anarchists are a lot more cautious and utilitarian in their approach to violence as form of direct action, as Ruth KINNA writes in her phenomenal book, The Government of No One. The incidence of violence and the negative public reactions it generated towards anarchists focused anarchist attention on their principles. How well was anarchist education advanced through violence? To what degree did any form of activism render anarchists vulnerable to state repression? The Japanese anarchists mistried for plotting against Emperor Meiji were sentenced to death merely for contemplating his injury.
I mean, that's absolutely terrible. And fuck Emperor Meiji, absolute tosser.
He has been dead for over 100 years, but, you know, sure, get his ass, king.
But if the state's willing to punish even the thought of violence, Why not go all out, baby? When the Gruul aren't raging, no one pays us any mind. It's only when we start chucking garden furniture through church windows that the other guilds give us the time of day.
Well, violence and the destruction of private property can be useful tools for bringing about systemic change too. Consider the Boston Tea Party, the Stonewall riots, the recent protests that erupted after the death of George Floyd. Whilst the vast majority of the protesters on the streets at the moment are non-violent, some of the property damage wrought by some of the protesters have managed to catch the international conversation in a very startling way. In Bristol, just down the road from me, a bunch of absolute top-shelf champions tore down a famous statue of a slave trader that had stood in the centre of town for hundreds of years and symbolically tossed that fucker in the harbour. This act drew global attention and lit a fire under the conversation here in the UK about police brutality and racism within the police, as well as causing a national rush for local councils to remove their own slave trader statues before they got ripped down too. As Karl Marx said.
Karl Marx, who's that?
I don't know, I think he's some parkour YouTuber's granddad or something. But as he said,
the bourgeoisie of the whole world, which looks so complacently upon the wholesale massacre after the battle, is convulsed by horror at the destruction of brick and mortar.
Not all violence is equal, and even the most militant anarchists won't condone all violence, especially if it's aimed at random innocent bystanders or their personal property. Also, there is a difference between personal property and private property. A lot of people get kind of confused by that. I won't go into too much detail about that at all, but I'd recommend you watch Spooky Scary Socialists video on the topic for that and maybe some other misconceptions that you might have. Dramatic and radical action is important. It's often the case that rapid and meaningful change can't happen by simply voting for better politicians within a current system. Lucy Parsons, one of the founding members of the Industrial Workers of the World, lays out this critique of relying on a current government for producing societal change very well.
I came to understand that such concentrated power can be always wielded in the interest of the few, and at the expense of the many. Government, in its last analysis, is this power reduced to a science. Governments never lead, they follow progress. When the prison, stake, or scaffold can no longer silence the voice of the protesting minority, progress moves on a step, but not until then.
Okay, I get it now. This is the kind of voting that anarchists hate.
Well, some do. There is vigorous debates within anarchist circles about how much you should buy into electoralism. A lot of anarchists don't vote at all. Some do in local elections, some do in national elections as a means of at least mitigating some of the harm the state can do. Some, like Noam Chomsky, argue that whilst the goal of anarchists should be the removal of the state completely, sometimes the state needs to be supported or even strengthened in the cases where it is supporting the needful or where the alternatives are a lot worse.
Devolution would be a democratizing move which I would be in favor of. It would be a move away from central authority down to local authority. But that's in abstract circumstances that don't exist. Right now, it'll happen because moving decision-making power down to the state level in fact means handing it over to private power. See, huge corporations can influence and dominate the federal government, but even middle-sized corporations can influence state governments. So under the conditions of existing systems of power, devolution is very anti-democratic.
Well, that sounds like a load of old centaur shite to me. Smash the state, but only the bits I don't like.
Well, you can absolutely disagree, Domri. Anarchism isn't a monolith, and anarchist action can take multiple forms, many of which can be easily incorporated into everyday life. Unfortunately, after decades of misrepresentation and false attribution, anarchy and anarchism have become words synonymous with violence and terror, when in reality, the forces that hold back anarchy, being the military and the police, inflict a lot more violence than any anarchist could ever dream to do. The supposedly peaceful liberal democracy, all of those three words are in scare quotes by the way, that we enjoy here in Europe and North America and Australia was built on and maintained by wealth generated from stolen native land and genocide, from the untold violence of the slave trade, from countless bloody wars, from modern exploitation of underdeveloped former colonies, from government-funded assassinations of democratically elected foreign leaders so that we can then go and take all of their natural resources for cheap. Imperialism, it's a hell of a drug, baby! If an anarchist robs a drugstore and steals life-saving medicine to then redistribute it to those who need it, who's the real criminal? Is it the person who took the drugs from the shelf, or is it the private company that put an unattainable price on continued existence and the government who let them?
Well, now that you mention it, it does seem like a bit of a double standard that the Azorius call the Gruul savages when we smash up a courthouse, but don't think twice about blowing up an entire neighbourhood provided they filled out all the right forms.
Completely. Anarchism is not the only ideology that can and does use violence to further its agenda. And this is more anecdotal than anything else, but almost all of the anarchists that I know don't have a closet of Molotov cocktails ready to pop off at a moment's notice. Most of them just want to be able to live in a world where they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from or if their family is going to get turned out on the street if they lose their job. And community allotments. Anarchists fucking love a community allotment.
Well, yes, but to get to the nice peaceful community allotment, you have to do the looting and the burning and the smashing of the municipal buildings first.
Well, whilst it's true that a great many anarchist or similarly anti-hierarchical societies have sprung up out of violence, there are a wealth of thinkers who have provided a great number of different peaceful ways and suggestions for how we can diminish the power the state holds over individuals and communities. Richard Wolff's book, Democracy at Work, which is annoyingly not in this stack because I lent it to my dad the day before shooting. Why? Democracy at Work discusses at length the idea of creating workers' self-directed enterprises, which are companies that are owned by the workers who have a democratic say in the management and direction of that company. Each WSDE would be set up within a given community, and everybody would share in both the labour and the fruits in his proposed workplaces.
All workers would now have two job descriptions. First, they would be democratically and collectively assigned a specific production task. Second, they would be democratically and selectively given fully equal participation in the design, operation, and change of that division of labor and in the distribution of its outputs. No one would work without engaging in both roles. The ancient divisions between mental and manual laborers, between workplace controller and controlled, between bosses and wage slaves would be overcome, thereby achieving an immense step towards economic and hence social equality.
It is also important to note that not all anarchist or anarchist-like societies have formed out of violence or violent circumstance. For example, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, one of the oldest participatory democracies in the world, was and is a confederacy of 5 tribes of First Nations people in what is now North America, who united with the common goal of just living in peace. It existed without having to violently reject a previous world order to get there, and is based on peaceful cooperation. Consider also how the writer Sam Mabard describes traditional African society.
In a significant number of African societies, there was an absence of hierarchical leadership, or any form of hierarchical organization. The traditional African societies were centers on equality and mutuality, a consensus at large. Yes, people deferred to seniority in terms of age, but beyond that, the society was based on mutual respect and mutual confidence as well.
Look, Spice, I've got nothing but love for you, but I feel like we're getting off topic here.
What? Why?
Well, all of this sharing and equality and community ownership, it all sounds a bit communist to me. Can we stick to talking about anarchism? Are you pulling my leg?
Look, it's not my fault that anarcho-communism is a massive thing. Blame Joseph de Jacques if you must.
I don't know who that elf is.
Not an elf, just French.
Communism is about everybody being equal, and anarchism is about everybody being individual. How does anarcho-communism work?
Well, the equality that communism strives for isn't everybody gets the same amount of everything. It's about ensuring that everybody has what they need. Some people need more than others and should have access to those things. For example, in an anarcho-communist community, you wouldn't use money. You would instead just take what you needed from the community's resources, be it food or clothes or DVD box sets, and you would reciprocate by giving back what you could to the community by producing food, making clothes, or doing media studies lessons for the local kids. The reason why the majority of serious anarchists are left-wing is because that they recognize that the system that capitalism is based on, wage slavery amongst other things, is just as oppressive and coercive as a state. It's also why anarcho-communists and anarcho-capitalists do not get along well at all, despite supposedly being on the same political axis. Watch this video by Halim Al-Ra, by the way, which goes into great detail as to why it is that all those fucking political compasses you see on Twitter are complete useless garbage. For the majority of people under capitalism, you produce value by lending your labor to a product or a service. A boss then takes that value, gives you back as little as they can get away with, and funnels the majority of it straight to the top of the business, where CEOs and executives and investors redistribute it amongst themselves. You effectively rent yourself out on the cheap, producing all of the value for a company while seeing absolutely zilch when it comes to the profits. Santa from earlier, Peter Kropotkin, one of the most well-read and famous anarcho-communists of all time, wrote of the inequalities of his time.
We in civilized societies are rich. Why then are the many poor? Why this painful drudgery for the masses? Is it because all that is necessary for production, the lands, the mines, the highways, machinery, food, shelter, education, knowledge, all have been seized by the few? It is because having reduced the masses to a point at which they have not the means for subsistence for a month, or even a week in advance, the few only allow the many to work on condition of themselves receiving the lion's share. It is because these few prevent the remainder of men from producing the things they need and force them to produce not the necessaries of life for all, but whatever offers the greatest profits to the monopolists.
Additionally, from earlier, I highly recommend Halim Al-Ra's video, What is Neoliberalism, if you'd like the ills of capitalism explained to you using a delightful Shutterstock slideshow format. And on top of that, the fantastic YouTuber Non-Compete has a series of videos detailing what life might look like under anarcho-communism, using what appears to be some flavour of Lego.
I don't know what any of those words you just said were, and I don't care. I don't want to give back to the community. I don't want to reimagine society. I want to do what anarchism was designed for and smash up people's patios.
Domri, for fuck's sake, anarchism isn't about breaking stuff for no reason. It's about dismantling the power of an oppressive state and building something new and free and federated from the bottom up. And what is with your fixation on the destruction of gardening?
It's Selesnian bullshit, and I don't care what you say. That is not anarchism, and you have no idea what anarchism is.
Nah. Okay, I held off from doing this. I held off from mentioning him, but I've had it with you. No idea what anarchism is, do I?
What are you doing?
I didn't want to bring him up.
Oh, you're not calling him.
I'm bringing him in, Domri. I'm bringing him in.
Mate, that is bang out of order.
You bought this on yourself. Hello! You there, Nicky?
Oh, hey, Spice. How's it hanging?
Not much. How's the spirit realm?
Infinite and barren.
Mood. Anyway, Domri's in the call if you haven't seen.
Oh, hey, Domri.
Hey, Bolus.
How's being dead?
Not ideal.
I was just having a wee chat with Domri about anarchism and how one of the fundamental points that all anarchists agree on is not being subservient to unjust, centralized, or hegemonic authority. And I was just wondering what it was that Domri said to you before you ripped out his spark.
It was something like, "Hey, Dragon, I am Domri Rade, champion and master of the Gruul clans. How about I swear allegiance to you and yours and we'll burn Ravnica to the ground, or something like that.
Thanks. And what kind of ideology would you say you ascribe to?
Oh, well, before I was imprisoned in this realm of infinite and serene desolation, I was a totalitarian autocrat who demanded absolute subservience of every living thing within the multiverse.
And were you going to let everybody live in freedom once Ravnica was burnt to the ground?
Are you kidding? I orphaned the entire population of Amonkhet, then raised those orphans to be vicious warriors who killed each other for honor, and then turned the survivors into mindless zombie foot soldiers.
So that's a no?
Yeah, I go with no.
I trusted you, you traitorous snake!
Oh yeah, you totally did. I still don't know why you did that, by the way. It seems super out of left field.
Yeah, actually, why did you pledge allegiance to Bolas? I have always wondered that.
Greg Weissman wrote it that way.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you poor thing.
Whenever I close my eyes, I can still see his spelling mistakes.
Well, don't beat yourself up too much. Even if I hadn't betrayed you literally seconds after you offered your loyalty, you wouldn't have gotten what you wanted. Even if you wipe out every trace of civilization from the face of the multiverse, there will always be some kind of society.
Exactly. You can't destroy people's desire to organize and work together, but you can destroy the oppressive forces that govern society and let regular people build a new world, removing the unjust power of the state, removing the means for the state to exercise that power, and rebuilding a world where communities look out for each other and work together voluntarily and consensually.
Oh, I was gonna say, there will always be some kind of society and I should be in charge of it.
Yeah, but we don't need to go down that road. Thank you for the chat, Nikki.
Please call again, I'm indefinitely alone.
Oh, God, I'm glad he's gone. Anyway, what was that about me being inconsistent?
Okay, I admit it wasn't very anarchist of me to pledge subservience to a tyrant who is going to kill everybody that I know.
Yes, and?
Okay, and I guess I now understand that destruction isn't the point of anarchism, it's just maybe a tool. Anarchism is about freeing individual people and communities from oppression and unjust hierarchies, be them social or economic. And yes, violence may be a part of that, but equally it might not be. And violence is also a part of almost every ideology in the world. And I guess if you are able to reform a community or society from the bottom up, it's not unrealistic to do so without an armed police force or prison system. Nor is it unrealistic to begin the process of abolition now.
Perfect. Oh my God, that's exactly the one. Thank you, Domri. Oh, that's a great quote to open with. I can finally finish the video.
No problem. Look, thanks for sticking with me whilst I was working this out. Sorry about calling you a bell end. Keep the hair, by the way. You'll look terrible with a haircut.
Oh, don't mention it. It is a massive topic, and there is a lot going on in the world right now. Never feel bad about respectfully questioning something you don't fully understand yet. I myself am still learning all of this, and I certainly shouldn't be the last word for you on the subject. If you want to know more, please go and look at all the videos that I linked through the video, and also I'll put a link in the description to a bunch of great resources that cover police abolitionism and anarchism in a myriad of better ways than I ever could.
Cheers, mate. I'll have a look.
No problem, Domri. Oh, and give my love to Dovin whilst you're there.
Wait. Dovin's down here?
Yeah, he got killed off in War of the Spark Forsaken. Domri? Domri, you there? Domri, I think you've frozen. Domri, hello?
Weissman!
As I hope you can discern from the time between my last video to this one, this took a really long time to make, both in terms of the research and the production, so sorry about the delay. I felt really weird about monetizing this video, so instead of doing that, I'll be donating what this video would have made, both in terms of YouTube ad revenue and also in terms of sponsorship money, to Southside Harm Reduction Services, which is an organization based in South Minneapolis who run an accessible needle exchange with the goal of preventing harm and destigmatizing drug users. The topics I have covered today are huge and complex, and you probably still have unanswered questions, and if you do, I highly recommend you check out some of the videos that I mentioned, as well as a few more that have come out between me shooting this piece and editing it. Videos like No Name Book Club's excellent breakdown of Are Prisons Obsolete, and some more news piece on the question of police abolitionism. Now, before I thank the patrons who've made it possible for me to tell my nan that this is actually my job, a lot of people helped out to make this video possible. I first want to thank Leo V's, who helped actually shoot the video, as well as be the person to give me my 2 haircuts, the one to get me to Domri and the one to take Domri away, which you can currently see on your screen. You can find all of their socials linked below and also on screen now. Do go check them out over on Twitch, Twitter and Instagram. I also want to thank Rowan Woolsey for just being a helpful little shoot imp. I don't know what the correct term is, but cheers, Rowan. Love you a lot. I also want to thank a lot of people who read through this script and who either gave feedback or lent their voice or did both. I want to thank Lily Harron, the excellent ASMR YouTuber. Please go check her out on YouTube and on Twitter and on Twitch as well. I want to thank Ife Grillo, the writer, the co-founder of Socialists of Colour, and the amazing poet. Please go check both him and Socialists of Colour out on Twitter at Ife Talks Back and at Sock of Colour. I want to thank Antworld with a 0 instead of the O because they're edgy. The wonderful photographer, YouTuber and activist. Please go find their work over on Twitter and Instagram at Antworld and at Ant Takes Photos. I also want to thank Merchant, the wonderful Magic the Gathering YouTuber, streamer, and probable professional voice actor after all of this. His KROPOTKIN was just delightful. Go find his work over on YouTube, over on Twitter, and over on Twitch, all at Merchant MTG. I also want to thank the ever delightful artist Hattie the Pirate for lending her voice to this. You can find her work over on Twitter, over on Instagram, and over on YouTube at Hattie the Pirate. I also want to thank Lance Leaving, another fantastic Magic the Gathering streamer. You can find his work over on Twitch. I want to thank Ellie of the Vale, another fantastic Magic the Gathering streamer and also Magic the Gathering writer. Please go check her out when she's streaming over on twitch.tv/Ellie of the Vale. And also check out her writing over at cardsphere.com. She's one of the best people writing Magic the Gathering content right now, in my opinion. Highly recommend. I also want to thank Nemo Omer, the amazing journalist. Shout out to her work in places like Galdem magazine, the Meridian magazine, the fucking Independent, big up. You can find her at Nimzeden. I also want to thank Tellerian Community College, who, you know, you probably know him, but you can find his work over on YouTube and on Twitter at Tellerian Community College or at Tellerian College. Thanks so much for being in this video, all of you wonderful, wonderful people. I have more people to thank though, so I can't stop here. I want to thank Carlia Whithart, the streamer, the organizer, the personal bully to me. You can find her work over on Twitch and over on Twitter, all at Carlia Whithart. I want to thank Ray Roberts, the photographer, the YouTuber, the streamer, the filthy Jigglypuff main. You can find his work all over the place, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, all at Ray Roberts Films. I want to thank Not Corey, the YouTuber, the TikToker apparently, and the podcaster. You can find his work over on YouTube and on Twitter at Not Corey. And also please do go check out The Sci Guys, which is the podcast that he's on, where they talk about interesting science in an accessible and fun way. Highly recommend that one. I also want to thank We're in Hell, which is a delightful sentence to say. The wonderful, wonderful YouTuber whose work I've only been watching for the last sort of like month or so, but I've been really enjoying what they've been putting out. Please go check out their work over on YouTube and on Twitter at We're in Hell. I also want to thank Thrixix, the Magic the Gathering streamer and YouTuber, and similarly to Merchant, man with a voice like butter, for lending his voice and for having a look over this script. And finally, I want to thank Carlos Mazza for doing a wonderful Nicole Bolas, which is a strange sentence that I don't think anyone had ever planned to say in their life. Carlos is a fantastic journalist and YouTuber. You can find his work over on YouTube at Carlos Mazza and also over on Twitter at Gay Wonk. He also had a couple of recent videos coming out about the police, and I highly recommend you go check them out. And that's all the people who lent their voice, but I wouldn't have a YouTube channel without the support from my wonderful, wonderful patrons. And of course, a massive thank you again to Channel Fireball for continuing to sponsor this very bizarre YouTube channel. But I do want to thank my patrons. You make it possible for me to do this for a living, which is wild and cool. And some of the patrons that I do want to thank include a gay American couple, a socialist hobgoblin, Ace of Heartzoo, Adam Gable, AJ Ingram, Alex Berman, Alex Flynn, Alex Wood, Alice Piralis, an alt-right sleeper agent who gives money to communists Booker Idaker, Anthony Baker, Anthony G. Reap, Bambi Roper, Ben Pike, Biscuit Blade, Blake Evers, Bradley Hutchison, Bradley Rose, Brian Dunn, Bro Yoti, Bruno, Kayla Blake, Cara the Disaster, Carl Comstock, Chase Beard, Chris DeVos, Corwin Stoddard, Causa, Darius Rudeminer, David in Spanish, David Vestal, Dolowen, Drew Pierce, Dystopico, Easy Kyle, Edgar Salomon, Exidian, Elizabeth, Erica Hamel, Ethan Abraham, Georgi Lyubanov, Hoopered Up. I am only saying this because our global economic system does not intrinsically support artistic expression. In response, I bolt myself. I love the placement of those two patron names, by the way. Jake Colburn, Jessica Settle, John Solog, Joshua M. Stephan, Jude Big Boy, Julie Bunn, Carlia Whithart, Kansas to Jesus, Kevin Quinn, Kurd Ape Apologizer, Kyle Van Linden, Lachlan McAllister, Liliana Vess, Queen of Discard, Lily Lord, Literally a Ghost That Pushes Over Candles, Literally Bees, Linnea, Magic Arcanum, Megan Kernan, me, Michael Forbes, Mike Mavramatis, Mordella Morana, Mr. Skolaton, Mooney Mon, Papa Titan 14, Penguin Flight School LLC, Professor Volpin, Raghava Cavalli, Ross King, Rowan Brown, Ryan Morgan, Sasha Evelyn Francis, Sean Caius O'Reilly, Silent Celine, Sir Shaunsey, Sky Johnson, Stingray, Swan Hunter, Taylor Street, the best Swans player in Montreal, the fantastic Mr. Bones, the suavest Orange, Totally a Spy, Travis K, True Lily, Umberon Pastry, Velum Balerin, Vittorio Grace, Vladimir Gorvikov, Xenon, Zoltai, and Zada's Ludonarrative Dissonance. And thank you to all of my other fantastic patrons. Thank you to everybody who's been supporting me over the year and a half that I've been making videos. It still blows my mind that this is my job. And thank you to you specifically for watching, for commenting, for sharing, for liking, for subscribing. And as always, stay spicy. I'm putting all this in the video, by the way. I hope you know that.
That's it.